Welcome to Church Public. Thank you for coming back today. My name is Matt. I will be your host today. And today we are talking about fear because, my goodness, fear is a big problem. It's a big problem today. It's a big problem in America, in the world, in the culture. Fear is paralyzing and it makes you do weird and crazy things. And that's not good for us. It's not good for us personally. It's not good for us as a culture. It's not good for us as a society. And the most repeated commandment in the entire Word of God is do not fear. Thanks for choosing Church Public. Let's get started. All right, today we are talking about fear because it's important, and it's important to not fear. And there's so much going on in the world, and there are, what do you call them? Entities. There are people that really just want you to fear more because fear is a big business. Fear drives sales. Fear drives viewership, and it's not good. It's not good to live under that idea. So what I wanted to start with today is a story, and I think this is a good story because this comes out of the Bible. Many of you may know this story. This is the story of Joshua, and I love this story because Joshua is a great guy, and here's the leading up to it. I mean, many of you have heard of Moses. If you haven't heard of Joshua, and Moses, the Ten Commandments guy, the parting of the Red Sea guy, right? And he did a bunch of other things. We're not going to get into everything today because that's a very long story. However, what happens is God brings along Joshua as a younger leader because Moses is not able to go into the promised land for a variety of reasons, again, that we're not going to get into today. But Moses eventually dies on a hill overlooking the promised land, and God fulfills his promise to Moses that he will see the promised land, and it's a lovely end to his life. And then Joshua, the younger leader, is now in charge of the Israelites, and he is in charge of leading the Israelites into the promised land and into their new territory and their new inheritance. However, there are people that live there, and so part of this process is battling some of the people that are there in this land that God has given them. And part of it really is a faith journey of fighting the battles that God has in front of you to see if you're ready morally, spiritually, character-wise to be part of God's kingdom. So in Joshua, the very beginning of it, we're going to look at Joshua 1:1. You can look that up in your Bible. You should read this story. You can read the story preceding that as well as in Moses and what goes on with him. But for Joshua, he's this new young leader, and I don't know about you. Maybe you've been a new young leader in a certain situation and you think, I don't have what it takes to do this. Those are just common human concerns and fears, and we have them. We all have them. And that's why God repeatedly, again and again and again and again says, don't fear. And I love the beginning of this story because Joshua is just becoming the leader and becoming a leader on his own without the watchful eye of Moses, who has led the Israelites through all kinds of things over and over again for a lot of years. All of a sudden Moses is gone and now Joshua is the guy. And what do we do? And you read in Joshua 1:1, after the death of Moses, you have Joshua. And verse 2, Moses, my servant, is dead. The Lord is saying, now you and all these people get ready to cross the Jordan River into the land I will give you. And God goes on to say, I'll give you every place where you set foot, as I promised Moses. Your territory will extend from the desert to Lebanon, from the great river to the Hittite, all the Hittite country to the Mediterranean Sea in the west. No one will be able to stand against you all the days of your life. As I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will never leave you or forsake you. Now, first of all, that is a fantastic promise. And really, that's the promise. The one thing that you should want in this life is for God to be with you. Whatever you're doing, whatever you're going, you should want to go in the will of God. But what you really want is for God to be with you. And so this promise, I love this promise that God begins with, that God will be with you. And then this is where, like, literally the first thing that God tells him. Now, I know the first thing he says is, Moses did this thing and I'm going to send your people. And that's true, but really that's all history because God is just recapping, hey, I brought the Israelites out of Egypt. We crossed the desert. We lived in the wilderness. And now you're going to get the promise that I promised so long ago. So God is just rehashing history and promises and what's going to happen. And the first thing that God says to Joshua is, verse 6, be strong and courageous. Because you will lead these people. I swore to their ancestors to give them. Verse 7, be strong and courageous. Be careful to obey the laws. And listen to this, jumping to verse 9. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged. The Lord will go with you wherever you go. This is the point that I want to make today. This is the thing that I think is the most important thing today. If you hear nothing else, hear this. God wants to go with you, and God wants you to not be afraid because he is with you. And that is very hard. It's very hard in this day and age. It's very hard to trust that God is going with you. It's very hard to trust that God is going before you. And it's very hard to not fear. Especially it's very hard to not fear if you're listening to the people in the news, the people in politics, some of your friends and some of your family who are saying, no, this is the time to panic. This is the time to fear. The sky is falling, the world is burning down, and we're all going to die. Only the last part of that is true. We are all going to die. That is true. When? I can't say. Only God knows. But the rest of it is not true. It is not the time to panic. It's not the time to run around screaming. Obviously, the Chicken Little story that some of you know is a good, bad example of this. We shouldn't be afraid. And God reminds Joshua, reminds us, when you have Jesus, I am with you, and you do not have to be afraid. 1 Timothy, and Paul talks to Timothy and says, hey, Timothy, I want you to do the best you can leading the part of the church that I have for you. And he gives him a bunch of instructions. And he says this very near the beginning of 1 Timothy, God did not give us a spirit of fear, but a spirit of power and love and self-control. Paul knows what Moses knew. Paul knows what Joshua knew and what God told Joshua. You don't have to be afraid because we are not given a spirit of fear. We are given a spirit of power. That's God's power, not your own. If you try to do it on your own, sadly, you may be able to do it for a while, but you're not going to be able to do it forever because you just don't have enough. You don't have enough, and that's okay because you weren't meant to have enough because you're supposed to do it with God. God says, I will be with you. Jesus says, put my yoke on you, your burden will be light. That's the important thing. Do it with God and with the power of God, with love and with self-control. And self-control is a big one too. But these are just some of my favorite verses because we're such a culture consumed by fear. We are consumed by this fear and we're paralyzed by it. And it makes us do just really wacky, nutty things. We closed the world for more than a year after saying it was going to be 2 weeks to slow the spread. And that was more than a year of shutdown in certain places. Certain places are still not open, and certain places are closing down harder. And I do want to talk about that today. And I know some of you are tired of talking about the virus, and some of you are tired of talking about the shutdowns, and some of you will probably disagree with some of the things I have to say, and that's okay. You don't have to agree with me. Again, my main point, and I hope the thing that you grab is, we are not supposed to be ruled by fear. We are supposed to be a people who live in courage. Courage means courage from the heart. Have courage, take heart, don't be afraid because God is with you. You don't have to be afraid. Again, I feel like I say this a bunch right now, but it seems to be a theme that when Paul says to live is Christ and to die is gain, that's the truth. It is 100% certain that we're going to die. Save a couple of people in the history of humanity, everybody died. We're all going to die. How are you going to live? That's the more important thing. And how are you going to live wisely and rationally, not irrationally and not in the spirit of fear? Those are vastly different things. So as we look at numbers dropping across the world and especially in certain states, in terms of the virus, in terms of the deaths, in terms of everything else, and we know much more now than we did before statistically. We have numbers for things as far as who is affected by this virus and who is not affected by this virus and what certain things do and don't mean for us as individuals. Yet we have places like Oregon who just proposed extending the mask mandate indefinitely. Yes, indefinitely, forever. Never will you see a smiling face again. And that makes me sad. It makes me sad because we as humans are more than just bags of flesh that walk around. we have a soul and we have emotion, and a lot of our emotion, as you well know, comes through non-verbal signals. We actually, as humans, do a fairly poor job of saying the things that we should say. I find this in my own life, I'm sure you do too, where we don't say enough, or we say the wrong things, or we say the right things in the wrong way. All of these things happen every day, all of the time, and what we should look at, and what we do look at, consciously or unconsciously, are the nonverbal signals. And these nonverbal signals are really important. Even the face and the mouth, maybe especially the face and the mouth, and covering that up really hinders communication. I don't hear a lot of people talking about that. Again, probably because they're so scared. But the face tells a big story. I even, you may not even realize how much you read lips to see what people are saying, and if they're saying what you think they're saying, and confirming what you think you're hearing. I mean, all of this it's actually important stuff. It's not trivial. It's important to connect with people on more than just a verbal level. It really is very important emotionally. Think of children. Think of children, and think of child development is what I meant to say, and how much their mother or father's face is really important to child development. So you have states like Oregon where they just proposed extending the mask mandate indefinitely. What statistics are they citing for this? Sorry, that was a pause. Yeah, I don't have any statistics. I read a bunch of articles trying to find out what statistics they're citing to say that we should wear masks in Oregon forever. I didn't see any cited by any of the leaders. They just said it seems like the right thing to do. Other states and other governors are saying it's not time to let off the gas on this. We have to increase our lockdowns. And I don't get it. I'm not seeing the studies that are connecting these things together, other than people trying to control your life. And I think they're trying to control your life. I've talked to a bunch of people who say they're not trying to control you. They're not trying to grab power. They're just trying to be safe. It was 2 weeks to slow the spread more than a year and some ago. Like 13 months ago, as I'm looking at my calendar, right? Then the information that we have a lot more information now. And yet now we're still locking down harder. If we just lock down harder, then we'll do better. And I just don't buy it. And I don't see the information. So this article, at the same time, this Oregon thing, at the same time comes with an article in Slate magazine, the conservative magazine. Just kidding. Sorry, sometimes I get a little sarcastic. Slate is not a conservative magazine. It's very not conservative. And yet they published this article titled, "It's About Time for Us to Start Wearing Masks Outside." And they have had incredible backlash against this. Some people lashing against this are saying things like, I just feel more comfortable wearing a mask and it makes me feel safe. Again, feelings and feeling safe it is not a goal. It should not be a goal. That's not the goal of humanity, to feel safe. Freedom, life, living, passion, those are goals of humanity, not safety. That's a terrible goal, because the ultimate end of the goal of safety is for you to live in a room by yourself forever until, again, you die, because we all die. That would be the ultimate safety, which of course isn't actually safety. It's just perceived safety, and it's a terrible way to live. We are meant for community, and Jesus, who says, love one another, is very aware that we need to be reminded that being together is really important. And I mean physically, like being in the same place with one another. To do things on Zoom is not equivalent. It's just not. It's just not equivalent to connect over video and over the internet. And while I appreciate you watching these videos, it's still not equivalent of being in a conversation with somebody. So I hope you do that as well. And my goal here, as always, is just to help you understand the world a little bit better so that you can go out and be a part of it. So the article in Slate gives a lot of good points. I'm not going to get all of them. You can read it online if you want to. Some good points, like if you are sitting in a field alone by yourself wearing a mask, the mask may not be necessary. And this article, while great because it's not coming from a conservative source, is full of common sense things that you've been saying and hearing for more than a year, because they're common sense. And up until last year, everyone knew they were common sense. And then for some reason, all of a sudden, I blame fear and the spirit of fear, as Paul points out, that we've lost our minds and we can't be wise about this stuff anymore. I mean, here's a question too. If you're vaccinated, can you take the mask off? According to the Biden administration, according to Fauci, according to some other people, no, you cannot. But not medically or scientifically, because it's more of a symbol. And it's a statement that helps other people know that you care. But I don't think that's a good statement. I don't think it's a good statement to say that I'm fearful of you as another human. And that's really what it's saying. I'm afraid I'm going to get you sick, or I'm afraid you're going to get me sick. So I'm going to sequester myself away from you because the only thing you're good for is getting me sick. That's a terrible moral place to be. And I'm looking at this from a moral place. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a scientist. I say that freely. You can check my math and my work and my science. That's fine. But morally, we shouldn't be afraid of each other from a moral perspective. Yes, there is the potential that if I come into contact with you, I'm going to get you sick, or you're going to get me sick. And at some point, that sickness may lead to death because, again, we all die. But we're not supposed to live that way. Jesus, you see, over and over again, even the disciples were confused by this. So it's not surprising that we're confused by this. But they would look over and be like, Jesus, you can't go sit next to that guy with leprosy because that's dangerous and he could get you sick and you could die. And Jesus, of course, being Jesus, knew, no, there's more to this. Humanity is worth more than being afraid of sickness. And Christians used to know this. And Christians even used to put themselves into situations where they could get sick. Father Damien is a great example. I'm going to get the book at a later episode and go through the whole story of Father Damien. But in a nutshell, he went to Hawaii to be with lepers and ultimately did get leprosy and did die of it, as far as I recall. And yet his whole goal was to comfort those who needed comforting, even at the risk of himself. And as Christians, we used to know that risking our lives, when Jesus says, deny yourself, die to yourself, that's literal. Like, we're supposed to risk for the reward of saving souls and healing souls and giving hope to lives that have no hope. We're supposed to live that way. And for some reason, we've lost that. So I actually do want to get into a couple of numbers. And these are not necessarily scientific numbers, but these are statistical numbers based on some surveys that have come out lately. And I think these are important surveys because they illustrate the point of how infectious fear is. So this first one that I want to show you is it's a question that people were asked about the chances for somebody with COVID being hospitalized. So I'm going to put this chart up and try to talk over it. So this is a chart, and the question was, what are the chances someone with COVID must be hospitalized? You can see some of the answers near the bottom, and they did break it up into different political demographics. And that is telling, but it also is not super important to me. It is telling that for a Democrat, the people that were asked believed, more than 41% answered that 50% of people who got COVID needed to be hospitalized. And if you add it up, 20% to 50% and up, that's more than 70% of people they thought would need to be hospitalized. So they thought, when asked, what are the chances someone who got COVID must be hospitalized? 70% of people would have to be hospitalized. And the real number is 1 to 5. 1 to 5% would need to be hospitalized. That's a huge amount of people that thought that if you got it, the percentage of you, the chance of you going to the hospital was really, really high. Now, I bring this up because I think it's an important illustration of how fear has really gotten into our minds and made us decide things that aren't real. Like, the perception that everybody who gets COVID is going to go to the hospital is really high here. The reality of how many people went to hospital that got COVID is actually really low. 1 to 5%, even 5%, but 1% of people is really low. And yet more than 40% of people thought half the people who got it had to go to hospital and might die. Why is this? Well, it's because everything on the media is saying this is the most dangerous thing ever and you'll probably die if you get it. And it's just, that's not true according to the numbers. It's just not true. A lot of people died. Yes, I'm not ignoring that, and every death is sad, and yet every death is inevitable as well, because again, we're all going to die. So every death is sad, yes. But the perception that everyone who gets this is going to die, or half the people who get this are going to die, is not reality. That's not reality. And again, just by the numbers, 330 million people in America, there would be, go conservative, 160 million people would be dead. And that is not close to what happened. Not close. Again, it's sad that so many people died of this. But the perception that so many more died is not real. And that fear created this perception of a non-reality. And now we're living in it. And you have states saying you're going to be affected by this indefinitely. You indefinitely, you are going to have to live differently because of this thing that didn't affect as many people as you think it did. That's a problem. And again, I just want to show one more. And this one is about ages, because they asked people about what age of people do you think died. So I'm going to put this one up here. This is, and again, this is partisan, so it's Democrat and Republican, and I don't care. I don't care which way you think on that. My point is going to be, as we near, I think, what you're seeing as the right side of your screen. The yellow is the actual numbers. The orange and blue are what people thought in percentages. And again, I'm just going to go through really quickly and just say the main point here is look at the yellow for a second and look at like how many people on the low end, like under 24 years, that number is almost off the chart. Like literally you can barely see it. And the number 65 and up is almost off the chart the other way, because that's the majority of people that were affected and died from this illness. And again, that's very sad, but age-wise, look at the way the yellow goes up really exponentially near the high age range, but look at the answers. People thought that a lot of 24 and under died, and people thought a lot of 25 to 34 died, and on and on. And yet, when you look at the yellow and the actual numbers, that's not actually what happened. So people think this affects a lot younger people, and in reality, I mean, you look at that, like, what is it, 70, almost 80%, more than 80% of people were over 65. And if you add up those last two columns, more than 92% of people were over 55. 92% of the people that died were over 55. That's a huge percentage of not young people. Again, every death is sad. And I do feel sad for those that lost loved ones. So don't make me out to be uncompassionate, but the spirit of fear, where we think this affected all of these children, we think this affected all of these young people, it didn't. And that fear is making us do crazy things. So again, we turn to our neighbors in the north, and we turn to Canada. And the reason we turn to Canada is because it is a Western style of government, like the United Kingdom and like America. So the stretch between what happens there and what happens here is not as far as you think it is. And we need to keep in mind that we do have some connection between the two places. So in Canada, Ontario, a group of residents protested some of the latest restrictions by putting their Canadian flag upside down across Niagara Falls and flashing SOS in Morse code, which is actually kind of funny, but also sad because of what happened. So I'm just going to read a couple of the new requirements that came out on April 16th. The government of Ontario had announced these strict new measures, including provincial police powers. All outdoor gatherings with people outside your household are banned. Playgrounds closed. All outdoor recreational activities to be restricted. Places of worship closed. Funerals, weddings, capacity are 10 people. Non-essential construction is over. Border checks are introduced at Quebec and Manitoba. Retail locations are 25%, and on and on. And I think this is the bigger scary part, which is the government of Ontario said the police would be given the authority to ask anyone outside or in a car why they are not home for the stay-at-home order, and the police may ask for their address, in other words, to check and make sure that's really where they are. So essentially it gives the police unlimited power to stop people and say, you're supposed to be locked at home, you are not supposed to be outside. And we've just gone through some of the fear ideas, we've just gone through some of the numbers, we've just gone through some of the numbers of people that have been affected, and that was the people affected in America. In Canada, actually the numbers are lower, and yet it's shut down 100%. I mean, like, shut down. And this is the reason that I share this, not just for my friends and family in Canada, but for those in America. And as you've seen some in England, if you think what is happening there is isolated and cannot happen in America, then you are deluded, because we are not that different. And the powers that be in the government right now are wanting to do these types of things if we give them the control to do that over an illness that affects those are older and mostly already health compromised. And every death is sad, and every death is a tragedy to those that are left behind. However, every death is still guaranteed. None of us make it out alive. And we used to know this as the church, and we used to act like this as the church. And again, throughout church history, there are examples beyond the Father Damien that I shared earlier of churches being the place that helped before there were hospitals, before there was standardized medicine. The churches were the ones that said, we know where we're going, and we know this life is not the end, so we will deal with the sick people. There are many examples of churches and church members stepping into the plagues and helping out in the plagues, because they knew that, not that they want to die, but that if they die, their future is secured, so they're willing to help where no one else is willing to help. This is what we used to know, and this is how we used to act. And now we're in this weird space where the actual death rate is not as high as people are saying that it is, and yet we're telling everyone you're locked down and you have to stay home and you cannot get out. And we've done that for more than a year. So when are we going to say, I'm not sure this is the best course of action, and how are we supposed to live? Because living life is more important than cowering in fear. If these experts, these scientists, these politicians had their way, we would be locked inside forever, because of course that is the safest way to go. But that is not the best way to go. And freedom is the antithesis of this. I'm not saying be dumb. Hear me correctly. I'm saying have common sense. I'm saying stay home if you're sick. I'm saying go to the doctor if you're sick. Of course, do the common sense things. But if you're not sick, if you're healthy, especially if you're young, and especially now that all these vaccines are out, if you've had a vaccine, why are we still locking down as if we're all going to die just by seeing another person on the side of the road? We literally have lost our minds on this, and I don't know how to help it other than to keep talking about it and hope that you keep talking about it. And then we can finally say, hey, we should live differently because we are Christians and we know what our guarantee is. We know where we're going after all this. There's a reason that do not fear is the most repeated command in the entire Bible, and that is because we're so susceptible to it. We get a little taste of fear and it ruins our whole perception of reality, and we panic and then we act irrationally. This is just how we are, all of us. None of us are immune to this, so God has to keep saying again and again and again, just like the first thing he said to Joshua, don't fear, have courage, live life to the fullest. Jesus says, I want to give you abundant life, not just a plain boring life, abundant life. And we need to live up to that. Again, don't hear me wrong. I'm not saying be dumb. I'm just saying use common sense and live with boldness and courage in the face of this life, knowing that you have a life to come, and sharing that hope and that love with those through, as Paul said to Timothy, self-control. And I want to say and end with the fact that we can change things. You are not helpless. Based on the pushback, even in Canada, to this story, the reason I like this story is people said, this is too much. And the government backed down a little. This is a quote, after fierce criticism of the new rules, some rules were amended on April 17th, the day after. Now, police can only stop an individual if they have reason to believe they're attending an organized public event or social gathering. Now, I don't think that goes near far enough, because that basically means they can have any reason they want to stop you and say, are you going to a social gathering, or are you outside your house, and are you not living up to the closed mandate? But we can keep pushing on this and saying, this is too much. Like, we shouldn't be closed for this virus, according to the CDC, with a 99.9% survival rate. How will you live? How are you going to live? Are you going to live in fear, or are you going to live in faith? You have to choose. You cannot be on the sidelines anymore. You cannot let this wave of fear fall over you. You have to decide how you're going to live. You have to decide if you're going to live in fear of the death that will inevitably come, or if you will live in the faith that God loves you and God cares about you. And yes, you will die, but right now you have the opportunity to live and love and share hope and share joy and share relationship with people who need those things so badly. This is a time of immense fear and immense darkness. And if the church doesn't stand up and give hope, who is going to stand up and give hope? Who else? This humanistic world, the humanistic religion that we talked about yesterday, is not going to give you hope. Their monkey hybrid clones are not going to give you hope for a future. That's a weird, wild sci-fi future that I don't want to live in. No, the hope we have comes from Jesus and the life with him in worship forever. I mean, that is a hope which we get to practice here on earth, and we get to practice with that love that we have through Jesus Christ. And that is the only way. That's the only way. I've studied a lot of different religions, and we can talk about other world religions on another episode, but none of the other religions give you this kind of hope. None of them do. This is the only way to have hope, is through Jesus Christ. So I hope that you've been encouraged by this. If you're mad at me, you can tell me so, and you can send me some messages if you want, because I've overstepped my bounds. That's fine. But I feel like we need to talk about these things, and we need to be honest about what's really going on, and try to share as much hope as we can in this dark and broken and fearful world. As always, God bless, and I hope that you keep the faith.